All right, what's going on, guys? Everyone's here early. That is a good sign. Hey, Emily Williams, thank you for organizing.
Hey, I'm here. I'm going to go ahead and make you host. That way you have all the controls.
So good.
All
Awesome.
the power.
Great to see all these familiar names and faces. Hey, Michael Starks, how you doing? I like the
Great, thank you.
The little scruff happening, a little leftover from the summer.
Yep.
Excellent, excellent. And I talked
about wearing a mask.
What's that?
It's easy to do wearing a mask.
Yeah. And then I talked to Lindsay earlier, so she should be joining us. This is great. Nice turnout. Let's see. Your guys' stuff. Okay. All right, there's Lindsay. That's great. Hey, Lindsay, welcome. Oh, that's right. You have the best Zoom background. I remember that now. It's very regal and distinguished. And
it's a built-in. We live in an old row home in Philadelphia, and so was here. It's an old home.
It looks amazing, though.
And then my husband collects. Well, he likes to collect and drink like Scotch and bourbon, and he saw a picture of Herb's collection. Which is like this nice big bookshelf kind of thing behind Herb's bar. And so then my husband decided he had to also organize it in the same way. So it's like now all just like stacked vertically,
that's cool.
Makes it a little degenerate, but.
That is awesome. That is an outstanding Zoom background. Dude. Wow, we have a great turnout and exactly on time. This is incredible. I think it's probably the first one. And then after this, it's going to get steadily as everyone gets jaded and cynical. I'm just kidding. But welcome. I just wanted to say hi to everyone. Welcome. My name is Wen Chen. I'm at UCSF, and I have the honor of being the director of Endocrine Surgery University, which is your fellowship educational, home, I guess. And it started off as, some of you may know, it started off as a brainchild of Dr. Martha Zeiger, former president of the AAES. And probably about 12, 13 years ago, she got the idea to create this fellows training course. And it started off as just a one-day thing, became a two-day thing. And now we've really expanded it to become this all-year thing with multiple webinars through the year. And then, God willing, a in-person day and a half educational symposium at the AAES meeting, or a little bit before the AAES meeting next May. And so I want to welcome all of you, our 2021-2022 AAES fellows. ESU fellows for this first webinar. And tonight, we're going to talk about something which is probably very much on everyone's mind, which is about finding and negotiating your first endocrine surgery job. And we are very lucky to have two speakers with outstanding experience and insight and perspective, two authors actually of the AAES white paper called Finding and Negotiating an Endocrine Surgery Practice, which I will distribute to all of you after this session. Our first speaker is, or first of two, I don't know which order they're going to go, is Dr. Lindsay Kuo, who is an assistant professor of surgery at the Lewis Katz School of Medicine at Temple, a graduate of this same ESU a few years ago, and now doing great things both at her institution, but also nationally with our organization. And in surgery, going to provide a little bit of the academic perspective and her own. We have childcare happening. I think that's, hold on a second. There we go. Childcare happening tonight. So, and then Lindsay is our first speaker. Our second speaker, Dr. Michael Starks. Mike Starks, who is a private practice surgeon up in Maine, works at St. Joseph Hospital in Covenant Health Systems in Bangor, Maine. And I had the pleasure and privilege of serving on the AAES Council with Mike. We were co-council members, got an extra year because of COVID, so we get to be 4-year council members. And I learned so much from Mike, and he's an awesome guy. And he also has incredible perspective, a little bit more time and experience as a surgeon, an endocrine surgeon, and can give you some great insights as to what it takes to land and be successful in a community-based practice. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over. And what we can do is, if you want to throw in questions in the chat, that would be great. We plan to leave time at the end of this whole thing, at least 30 minutes plus, to have just questions from you all. And I want this to be the policy throughout the year. All of our webinars, these are very informal. We want you to be our colleagues and our, being able to ask questions and just have conversations about various topics. So certainly feel free to enter stuff in the chat, but we'll also leave time at the end. So yeah, Mike and Lindsay, I don't know who's going to go first and what you guys have on tap, but we're really excited to hear from you.
I'm happy at least to just go ahead and introduce myself more thoroughly, if you want to start with that, and
Yeah,
then we can, and I'll talk, I guess, really briefly about how I sort of got my current job. So again, I'm Lindsay Kuo. I am an endocrine surgeon here in Philadelphia. I did my residency at Penn and my fellowship up at the Brigham, and I'm in academia, and I kind of always knew that I wanted to go more the academia route. And more importantly, I had this significant geographic limitation when I was looking for a job, because my husband actually stayed in Philadelphia. His job is located here, and so he stayed while I went away for fellowship. And so if I hadn't found a job here, I'm not entirely sure what we would have done. But basically, I started looking into jobs like almost as soon as I started fellowship, because I had significant limitations. And everyone tells you, or probably you've heard along the way, that if you want a job like in academia, you have to sacrifice something, either an endocrine only practice or geography or something. And I was willing to sacrifice the endocrine only practice. I was willing to sacrifice a lot of other things, but like the geographic limitation really was sort of significant for me. And then I was very lucky that I kind of cold emailed a lot and sort of horned my way into position at Temple, where they did not have an endocrine surgeon. So I'm the only and the first one. And luckily the otolaryngologist who had been doing a lot of those cases is actually just that spring decided he was going elsewhere. So it was a very long process of cold emailing, a lot of people being like, no, we're not hiring for anything like that. And I was willing to sacrifice endocrine only, but I really wasn't looking for like a general surgery job. Like I really just wanted to be doing endocrine as some large part of my practice. So it took me several months to get interviews and then several months to hear back. And then ultimately I was also looking at a job at Hahnemann, which then like a year later closed. So I'm glad I didn't go that route, but it just took me a while to get to actually the job that I have. And I love the job that I have. I do elective endocrine only. And I take some general surgery call on the weekends. So it is endocrine only. it has been a challenge in its own way to build up a program from nothing. Not that I wasn't expecting it to be, but it has been a challenge, and it's something we can definitely talk about if you are in a similar position or considering similar jobs, um, from a variety of standpoints. And it's been very gratifying to build it from nothing, and it's been very satisfying to do things for the way I wanted to do them in terms of my clinical care. But again, there's a lot of obstacles that come with starting a practice from nothing. That said, I really love that my job right now, and I'm not looking to like change it. But that's sort of where I got to where I am. And then I guess we can go on to Mike, and then we can kind of open it up more, but whatever you guys want.
Sure. As Wen said earlier, my name is Mike Starks, and I am in private practice in Bangor, Maine, well, in hospital employed practice now in Bangor, Maine. I started out medical school in Seattle, University of Washington, and then came across the country for 5 years to do residency at Maine Medical Center. It was a very busy clinical-based program, and I always had the sense that I wanted to go into private practice, general surgery. And as I was in residency, I just really started enjoying the endocrine cases in particular. The first job that I took out into after residency was in private practice with a second general surgeon. He was very, very busy, and within the first couple of weeks, I was also very, very busy. It was doing, mouth to anus, soup to nuts of general surgery. And, but, with every one of those patients, I examined their thyroid and would find thyroid nodules, and people started understanding that was something that I liked, and started referring things to me. There were other people in our community, and I think that's something worth talking about, that were doing endocrine surgery at the time. I'm in the mid part of Maine, but really people think of it as northern Maine. And in northern Maine, there were 8 or 10 people that were doing a small little handful of all of this. And so there are a few things that I've done during my practice that have helped consolidate all of that practice, all of those referral patterns coming to me. And I think those would be helpful for people that are looking at a practice that is combined general surgery and endocrine. And even if you're not looking for that, I know that a lot of the people coming out in endocrine surgery fellowships right now are forging their own endocrine surgical practice. And so I think that perspective is helpful. I've worn several different employment hats since I've been here. I was employed by this other surgeon for a couple of years. After 2 years, I decided to go out on my own, and I started my own practice, and I ran that for 10 or 11 years. And subsequently, I signed on with the hospital. Each of those have their own strengths and weaknesses. I'd be very happy to talk through those. Contracting issues, things like that, I think would be very valuable things for us to be discussing now, in terms of what structures contracts take. I've seen them in a number of different forms, and so those would be fair questions for you guys to be asking. I think this is a great topic to be the very first topic that you guys have for this series, because there's no better time to start looking for a position than right now. Even if you're not knocking on people's doors right now, some of it is like figuring out who you are, where you want to be, where your family is, where your support is. Those are all very important things. What kind of activities you want to be doing outside of the hospital. Life is short. And once you get done with your work week, you want to find places that you can go and do things that you like to do. So let me stop at that, and we can go from there.
And I can pick it up then a little bit too, because I think the first question, I think the reason we actually wrote the whole white paper was because it's very daunting to find a job. Like, nobody tells you how to do it. I mean, for applying for residency and then applying for fellowship, there's like an application, there's a timeline, and there's like a limited number of possibilities. And when you're finding a job, there's endless possibilities, because you figure out what you want, where you want to be, what are your priorities, and there's no right or wrong answer. And it's really endless. And so it just feels like it's very easy to get lost. And again, there's no timeline. So it's very easy to either feel like it's too early, it's too late. I would say now is really the time, at least to figure out exactly all the things that you want, and then to start reaching out to people in that geographic region, or if it's not a region and you want a certain type of practice, to then be aggressively, oh, there's a kitty, to be aggressively then starting to email people who, or to institutions or practices, because again, all these things take time. Like it's not like with residency or fellowship where you match in March and then you're there in June. It's like you get an offer and like the paperwork moves slowly, and then it goes back and forth, and there's credentialing. It's everything gets very drawn out, and it takes a lot longer than you would think. And so I would say now is the time to figure out what you want. And then next month is the time to be starting to send out all the emails. Back when we had the college in person, I would say that was the time that you email everyone before and say, I'm going to be at the college, I'd like to meet you. And now, unfortunately, we don't have that in-person opportunity, but I still think that timeline very much kind of is appropriate to start sending out all the feelers about jobs, because the earlier the better, to be quite honest. And then I would say, along with that, you should start coming up with kind of, again, as you're thinking about the things that you want, start to come up with cover letters for sending out your resume, brush up your CV, brush up, again, like your list of your accomplishments and stuff and your goals, and write them into a nice, beautiful CV, and have a cover letter that goes along with it that explains what your goals are and who you are as a person, and then be able to tweak that for individual jobs that you apply to. Because it's good to be able to send that off to somebody and be able to say, hey, this is me, I'm looking for this kind of job. And also to get some references in order. So probably your current fellowship mentors are the ideal people, or your former program director or chair from your residency. And just to send them a quick email and say, hey, would you be able to serve as a reference? And that way you can put their name and their contact info down. And so anyone who's going to be looking at your stuff can reach out if they want to. I have no idea if anyone actually does, but you should definitely have that information down there so people have a point of contact as a reference for you if they want.
I think absolutely people look at references. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Like in our smaller world, people actually email out. I don't really know.
But
yeah, I think the endocrine world is small enough that people pick up the phone and they call them.
That's true.
And it is true. And I would say your current PD is going to get a lot of calls. Any job that you apply for, your current PD is going to usually be the point person. It's not usually your residency program director, although they will often get, once it gets to the point you're really, down the line, they might get contacted, but it's really your current fellowship PD. And they should be well seasoned and well versed in how to deal with that and how to advocate for you, et cetera. But that's generally going to be the point person. And it's interesting because it's the person kind of the least in a way, in that you've just started working with them, et cetera, but they are the important contact person in that job search for the most part. Mike, did you want to add in on some of the advice that Lindsay just provided?
Well, I would say the value of a mentor, and these people are new to you right now, but you will quickly find that endocrine surgery is a relatively small place. All of the big names fit very comfortably in a pretty small room. And so I do think that starting out with your residency mentors as well, and exploring who they know and what doors they can open in terms of getting interviews, I think that's very, very important.
I certainly want to open it up to questions from the fellows, but I wanted to follow up, Mike, on some of as you decided to kind of specialize and to get more oriented in the world of endocrine surgery. What kind of connections did you make? When did you get involved with the AES? How did you build that part of your specific practice, not necessarily on the clinical side, but just in developing the skills and the know-how without having done a fellowship?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I was looking for ways to kind of distinguish myself from the other surgeons in the community. And I think once you get to wherever you're going, this is going to be an important thing for you as well. I said, I really want to try to do things in the very best way possible. And I think the best place to start with that is guidelines. AES has guidelines, ATA has guidelines. So, just put those all in your memory. That's a great place to start. In the Northeast, I would go to the thyroid parathyroid course at Mass General, and start meeting people there. I remember having a dinner one night, and Jerry Doherty walked in, and he recognized me from the conference and sat down, and we started talking. And I said, I really want to distinguish myself in this part of the country, and if I could only put my resources into one meeting, where would you be going? And he said, oh, definitely AES for clinical types of stuff. And so I started doing that, and I initially felt a little bit like a fish out of water in a lot of academic people in the place, and not so many general or community-based people. And I think over time that conversation has shifted a lot. I think as the academic fellowships are flush with surgeons, the fellows are finding other places and making them into academic places too. I think it's a really wonderful thing to see. But so anyhow, I started becoming active in AES and eventually became a member. And so I think that's been a great way for me to get into things. In terms of my own community, a couple things that have been very helpful. I started a endocrine surgery pathology conference within our own community, and it was a great way to just get people together. When there's surgeons that are doing 20 different kinds of operations, and endocrine's a small sidelight of that, they might not want to go to that meeting. And so it's one way that you can distinguish yourself, and you can say, look, we're going to set this meeting up. We're going to invite all the endocrinologists. We're going to invite all the surgeons who do this stuff. And the ones that show up, they get to sit and talk to the endocrinologist for that hour or two. And those people start to realize that you're very interested in what you're doing. Another thing I would also say, in smaller locations where there might not be as much endocrinology support, PCPs, and especially mid-level providers, APPs, those people love it when people pick up a phone and call them, and don't yell at them. Surgeons have like a very bad reputation for not being very kind. And if you're just nice to people, boy, it really pays big dividends.
So that's great advice. And yeah, I would say for all of you going out there, if you're not joining an established academic center, starting a tumor board, a journal club, some kind of collegial activity like that has an academic bent, but it's an opportunity for people to meet you and get to know you and see that you're a thoughtful, well-trained person is really, really important. That's a great way to make inroads in any community. Lindsay, I want to ask you the same thing. When you were building your practice at Temple, did you have to do any kind of measures such as this to get yourself kind of known out there?
Yeah, and I will say I'm still building. I mean, that's part of, people told me like, oh, it'll take at least 2 years, maybe 5 years. And I would say like, especially with the pandemic, there was definitely like I wouldn't say a dip, but like everything kind of plateaued at that point. But even now, I'm still thinking about like, how do I build and expand? What I found is being, like Dr. Stark said, being nice, being accommodating, being communicative. These are all things that people don't expect from surgeons, but will also set you apart. Especially because in the beginning, at least for me, because I wasn't doing a lot of general surgery or any general surgery, I wasn't super busy. It takes a long time for you to get like clinically busy. And so again, maybe you will be in a different situation where you will be busier at the beginning because you're either going into an established practice, or somebody will be sending you cases, or you'll be doing a lot of general surgery. But I told the endocrinologists and the PCPs, like, for primary hyperpara, I'll take them at any point in time. Like, you don't need to do all the imaging and everything else. Like, I will just take them. And the endocrinologists now tell me that, amongst other things, they love sending me patients because they know I will help with our somewhat difficult patient population, like getting them through, like getting all the imaging. Like, I will help, my assistant will help set that all up. I will follow up. I will make sure it gets done. And it's a load off of them because they are managing like very sick people with diabetes and all this other stuff. And so it's very much a headache at some points. And I wish all the patients just came to me nicely and neatly packaged and ready to go. But you know what? Like, they really appreciate being able for me to just take care of a lot of this stuff. Plus, that means that I get to do the imaging that I want to do. So I just really advise that, again, being communicative, like everyone gets a letter afterwards. And then just being available for the patients too, because that's really important for them.
One other thing I would add to that is if you can find yourself in a position where there's ultrasound in your office, it's been tremendously important for me. PCPs love that they can send a patient to you and they get the ultrasound and maybe even the FNA all in the same day. That if one thing has probably built my practice more than anything, it's just that accelerate the timeline of getting a patient seen.
Yeah, that's great advice from both of you, Lindsay and Mike. And yeah, I want to hop on that. I mean, yeah, building that referral base and being available to them is really key. And that's giving them your cell phone, your email, all the ways to contact you, and being available when they want to, send you someone. And, I'm still, I'm I think 13, 14 years into this now, and I still, have a lot of texts and calls with my referring endocrinologist, and I'm building new ones as new ones join the community. And just, they like being able to just call you up or text you. And it's not really that much of a bother. It's really, and in fact, it saves a lot of headaches sometimes because, going through all the different regular channels can take a lot of time. And sometimes the document or the paperwork gets lost somewhere, or it doesn't get uploaded into Epic or whatever. And if you just get that one text from your colleague, your endocrinology colleague who says, hey, I've got this, 35-year-old woman with, I think it's a FIO, and, what do you think, blah, 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 boom. So that patient's on my radar. I contact my staff directly. That patient gets seen in my clinic that week, boom, boom. And so all those kinds of things. And it's also better patient care, I think, eliminating a lot of the kind of people in between. So that kind of availability and direct communication with your referring providers is really key. And Mike, what you said is absolutely true too. Certainly ultrasound is a key component of every endocrine surgeon's practice. And being able to do that before an operation, confirming, even if it's been seen on outside imaging, confirming in the office really helps you make that mental roadmap, makes your operation successful. And so I think developing that in your practice and having that available is really, really key.
Yeah, the ultrasound report you'll get from radiology oftentimes doesn't think about the things that you need surgically to take care of a patient. One of the things that frequently when somebody comes in, they've already had the ultrasound. I'm really looking to say, well, what's the other lobe look like? Are there any lymph nodes out there that people haven't really looked at and thought about? So it's tremendously valuable.
Absolutely. Questions from the fellows? Anyone have anything burning they want to get up? Because I want to pick these two's brain all session, but I want you all to weigh in. I got some questions coming in here from Francis Lee to Dr. Kuo. In building a new practice without specific endocrine surgeons, how did you identify senior partners to help or be on standby for help during challenging cases? Great question.
That's a great question. And I'll be frank, like it's not, I've cobbled together some, and it's not at all as, would be the same as where I trained, and the junior surgeons could just call the senior surgeons on the phone. They'd wander on down from their offices. And I do wish that's like sort of the one thing I really wish I had. I still think I am lucky in that the new chair of otolaryngology actually started the day I started. And so she was told when she was hired that I had been hired and they would need her to be sort of like my senior mentor. She's head and neck. And I think there's a whole like financial package that kind of went along with that in terms of like my revenue and also my salary. I don't really know, but she's who I called. And, it's not ideal because I feel like she's not in my department, and she's a busy woman because she's the chair of the department. And so it's in some, like, I really had to learn, like, when do I really need to call somebody versus when do I just need to like take a moment and push through. And that took me a good year to figure out, to be able to tell myself sometimes like this is really hard and I can call somebody if I need to, but you know what, I'm going to just push through. It took me a good year to figure that out though. In terms of the adrenals, I have a surgical oncology partner, but he doesn't really do them. So it's not ideal. And that was, I would say, is the biggest downside of being in a situation like mine. So.
Thanks for being so frank about that, Lindsay. And that is challenging. I'd say, yeah, for adrenal stuff, I have found, I even still now lean on my surgical oncology or hepatobiliary colleagues, or transplant for that matter, for certain challenging cases, locally advanced ACC, or something that looks a little bit more stuck to surrounding structures, et cetera. So having them around, review imaging, and just to help you in the OR if possible. For cervical cases, while they may be your competition in some ways, having the head and neck surgeons in the area as your colleagues and friends can be very helpful, especially for locally advanced disease or something where you're going to need a little bit of another pair of hands or another pair of eyes. And I would say not, hands-on, but definitely lean on your mentors in your current fellowship programs. Call them. I still get calls and texts all the time from our former fellows, even those that have been in practice for a while. Let's say I've got this challenging case, I've got this situation, what do you think? And most of the times they're on the right track, and they just need that confirmation or that support to say, you know what, you're doing the right thing. Great job, and it's okay. I mean, that's totally expected. When the fellowship ends, it doesn't like end, right? You never, say goodbye completely. And those relationships are really, really important. And having them take a look at the imaging, talking through a game plan for what to do, all those kinds of things are totally legit. And, I speak, I think, for all the program directors and fellowship attendings that that's what we're here for. This is all, and we all did the same exact thing. And honestly, we still do. I've got Kwandu in the next office over. I've got a tough case. I'm going to go knock on his door and I'm going to say, hey, man, what do you think of this? And again, most of the time he says, you know what, sounds about right. He might throw me a couple pros or little bits of advice, but it's great to get that support and to feel that, you're not out there alone. You should not feel that way. Mike, what did you do in your practice if you needed help or needed someone to kind of lay eyes on something you were doing?
It was not always easy. So in my residency, lateral neck dissections were not something that I had a huge experience with. And so early on, I partnered with several of the ENT people and did those cases together. There was a senior surgeon in the community who was winding down his practice, and all he was doing was assisting various people. And he fortunately was very good with that. So those were very helpful things. Trying to think, those are probably the two best scenarios of that. And those relationships actually developed into more. Well, the ENT, the person who was doing the most thyroid, parathyroid around our community, eventually when he stepped down from practice, their office called and said, the other ENTs in this group aren't wanting to do this, and will you take over his practice? And I didn't have to do anything for it at that point. So
that's a very fortunate situation. Good job, Mike.
Absolutely.
That's great. Now I was going to ask you, Mike, you have been very instrumental in helping to guide the development of our community-based or clinical practice arm of the AAES. What are some of the resources that are out there for our soon-to-be newly minted endocrine surgeons going out there in terms of either places for people to discuss challenging cases, educational opportunities that are not necessarily centered around the meetings themselves?
So I'll put in a shameless plug for the American College of Surgeons Endocrine Surgery Discussion Board. So I'm the administrator.
That's not shameless. That was planted because I know.
No, thank you. So for those of you who are fellows, and I think all of you will be fellows by the time that you're into AES, the American College of Surgeons has a series of community discussion boards, and the Endocrine Surgery Discussion Board, I think, has had some very good teaching on it. As a general surgeon who now does a lot of endocrine surgery, I know what I did when I was a general surgeon doing, 10 or 20 cases a year, and how that's different from how I'm doing it when I'm doing, 300 cases a year now. And so I recognize some of the challenges. And so I try to put questions out there that get the lower volume people thinking. I try to reach out to higher volume people and say, can you put a question on this, because I know you have a special interest in this area. So it's a great place to pick up some pearls about things. I've learned a ton of things off of that site. In terms of how to operate better, things like that, I don't know that I have great resources for that. I would welcome Lindsay's thoughts on that, or your thoughts if there's other video sites out there. Certainly the ultrasound courses have been good through the American College in terms of picking up skills. I think all of you will pick up most of those skills in your fellowships, though. So.
Yeah, I think we're trying to put together some kind of AES-based education portal with different kinds of videos and other kinds of educational content for ongoing learning after fellowship. And so that is something I actually don't know where that stands, but I know we've made an investment in some of the software and have a lot of people working on building up. And I think that's done through the education committee, which is also a plug for joining committees within the AES and getting involved in areas that you are interested in.
I also do know that the Clinical Practice Committee is currently working on a webinar series that should be starting, I think, this winter, in terms of various means of how to improve your operating skills and so forth.
No, that's a great piece of information.
Two more places.
Yeah.
One is that there is, and I'm not really on Facebook anymore, but I am on Facebook, but there's like a young endocrine surgeons group on Facebook that a lot of us belong to and don't really do a lot with, but sometimes people will ask questions and then you can see what other people's responses are for, like, file it away mentally, or you can ask your own question, or, it's just actually very valuable, because I think that's where you see like a lot of cases that maybe you haven't encountered yet. And then use each other as a resource. I mean, you guys will get to know each other. I know you probably all had virtual interviews, but ESU in person next year, right? When? That's where our goal is. Meet each other in person.
Right.
I think you'll get your own group of people who you will want to chat with. And so I'm very lucky that I joined like a little group of people actually a year ahead of me, because Heather Wachtel was a year ahead of me in residency, and she had a little text group going, and they warmly invited me into it. And we kind of all refer to it now as our endocrine surgery support group. And so it's literally every day one of us is asking questions of the other, like, what do you do with this scenario? Or like, this happened in the OR, what should I do about this? And like, it's just really helpful to see that other people are going through the exact same things. And it also feels like it's slightly less stakes than like emailing, for me, like Jerry Doherty, and texting him and being like, hey, can you help me? Although and he has warmly and generously given me advice in the past. But again, you feel like these are the people you can bug all the time about little things, or just about frustrations in your practice. So reach out to each other too.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. Your classmates are your friends for life, and you will definitely lean on each other. Yeah, not just for the clinical and academic stuff, but for the small stuff, for the just general life stuff, etc. Good question here. This will be directed towards you, Lindsay. What advice do you have for being productive academically or in research when starting a practice from scratch? And I'll pause by saying, the next webinar that we have is going to be very academically based about building a career, building a research platform, et cetera, moderated by a bunch of the young academic faculty in the AAES. Yeah, Lindsay, what do you think about that question?
Well, I was going to say I'd like to join that webinar. So it is challenging because some of you will have colleagues who join well-established practices where they have like 25 years of patient data to draw on, and you're just gonna be very jealous. So what I can say is a few things, like figure out what your institution has. For me, we already had NISQIP, so that's where a bunch of my stuff has come from, and it's not just endocrine, but NISQIP, and figure out what resources you have in terms of statisticians or data analysis. When you have free time at the beginning, because again, you'll probably have a fair amount of free time at the beginning, figure out what some interesting questions are and how you can answer those with the limitations that you have. And I think, and then also keep a database of all of your own patients so that when the time comes, you have your own database. You just have to, I think, be really resourceful and thoughtful and kind of think outside the box compared to what a lot of other people do who walk into institutions where they have what seems to be endless resources. I'm sure they're not truly endless, but it just seems like they have a whole research machine. And I have myself, and I have a couple residents now over the last few years who I've worked with while they're in their research years, who I've been very lucky to have had because they can devote time and energy to these things. So figure out what your resources are and then be creative.
Excellent. Great advice. And yeah, that will get built upon when we talk a little bit more about kind of building the research side of the next thing. Mike, I wanted to direct a question towards you from Eric Quo. And he's asking, I feel like part of the hurdle of starting an endocrine surgery program is that it can be resource heavy. Ultrasound, IOPTH, FNA, laryngoscopy, et cetera. Do you have any helpful tips about how to negotiate for these resources if they don't already exist? And which resources do you prioritize?
Yeah, so that's a fabulous question. I think I would certainly say that ultrasound is probably the biggest thing that I would really push for. Sometimes that's a turf battle. Radiology a lot of times is not wanting to give up head and neck ultrasound. So that's one big issue you have to deal with. One thing that they can never do is be able to provide it real time. And so that's, and a lot of times if you're doing it in an outpatient setting, that's something that is a way to get around maybe a hospital embargo on anybody else doing radiologic procedures. So if you're doing it in an office, sometimes it's easier. How you deal with that, the financial hurdle of it. I sometimes think that, certainly contracting when you first come in is certainly the best chance to get things right off. And so one thing as a endocrine surgeon, you need to realize is that the procedures that you do are pretty well reimbursed for the time that you put into them. I think if you're an efficient surgeon, you can really crank out some numbers for hospitals that they will be very, very happy with. And so it would be very helpful for you to look at what the volumes of some people are doing and figure out on an RVU basis what that might mean for them. Because I think you'll compare it very favorably to a breast surgeon, for example, who they'll gladly get an ultrasound machine for. And by the way, if you're looking in general surgical practices and you find a practice that has a breast surgeon in it, you probably already have an ultrasound in your department. So that is maybe one helpful thing. But if your hospital won't say we're going to spend the $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 on an ultrasound machine, another thing you might be able to do is to say, okay, we're not going to do it now, but when my volume increases, when is the point? It's hard to fight over something today. It's a lot easier to fight over something a year from now or 2 years from now, but do it now because you're going to stick around. You're going to be there. If you say, you know what, if I improve the thyroid volume done in this hospital by 25% or 50%, you got to figure out what's being done there already. But if I can improve what's happening, this is another thing that will further increase what I'm doing. And so don't be afraid to look in the future and say, you know what, if I hit this bar, you're going to do X. And you're kind of aligning what you want with what they want. And if it's easy to say yes when they know it's going to be something that's going to be good for them.
That's great. And there's a piggyback question from Talia Bernekis asking about basically the other stuff around an office practice. So hiring and training staff, an office manager, advertising, billing. I mean, Mike, what did you have to do? I assume some of that was built into the other practices you joined, but I know you've given talks about or had seminars on the billing part of things too.
Yeah, so part of that you have to learn as you go. Part of that you reach out to senior people. I would certainly take questions from you guys offline at a later point. If anybody has any, follow-up business related questions. I've been in, I've worn every hat outside of academia. When I ran my own practice, I had to do all that hiring. I had to figure out the billing. you know, it's a lot to learn to do all your coding and things like that. Some hospitals will do it for you, some won't. So where else to get that? In our state, the State Medical Association puts on programs like that. They're not endocrine specific, but they are, you know, very good in terms of billing types of things. I think that's probably another reasonable place to get, you know, the business practice side of things. In terms of advertising, I think you need to really pin whoever you're trying to get your job with down before you get there and say, do you have a marketing department? Do you have a budget that you will be willing to commit to, you know, promoting my new practice? Those are very important things to line up ahead of time.
Yeah, Lindsay, what did you have to do in terms of you know, getting your name out there on the kind of marketing side? Did you work with anyone in the department? Did you have to do some stuff yourself?
So they set me up with the Temple marketing department, which, and I don't really have experience elsewhere, but I feel like is kind of a very old school approach to marketing. And I'll be honest, I don't think it's been like super successful in that. I think what they do is they'll like call around and then they'll set up a lunch, and then you go and you sit in this private practice, like lunchroom. And then all of the medical assistants and the other staff will come in, they'll say hi and they'll eat the lunch. And then you're lucky if like the endocrinologist or somebody else like pokes their head in for like 5 minutes. So, and I just don't think that's very successful. And so I'm kind of still trying to figure out a workaround, like quite honestly, because I feel like most of my practice right now is internal referrals. I have probably like 95% of the internal referrals right now. But if I want to keep growing, then I need to work on my external referrals. So, you know, that's something that I'm still working on. I think we need, you know, you need to be aggressive about like asking patients to review you for the patient review websites. You need to make sure like all of your stuff is updated. So if somebody Googles you, they can find you. So that eventually when somebody is searching for you, you're there. And then any other time, I think like as Dr. Starks mentioned, he was looking at everyone's thyroid, like anytime you get sent something random, then you reach out and find out who their PCP is and who their endocrinologist is if they have an endocrine problem. So like one of my partners was sent somebody who has an umbilical hernia. This was a couple years ago, and umbilical hernia, and she'd had a FEO removed elsewhere, like before my time at like a random community hospital. And my general surgery partner sent her to me because he's like, does she have another? He had no idea. He was like, can you figure out what's going on? Does she have another FEO? Can I just fix her hernia? Whatever. So I sent some metanephrines. She's got no nodule. She's fine. But I figured out who her endocrinologist was. I called him, and he's now been like a steady source of referrals. And so it's really like taking advantage of all those little moments and then turning them into a referral, because I don't know in this day and age what the best way is to meet people, especially that so many physicians are doing a lot of telemedicine. They don't want people coming into their office. You know, it's not, I don't have an answer to that yet. But I would say just don't limit yourself to what the marketing department does for you. Like just figure out alternatives to that too.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Lindsay. Early on, I really got very little help, even though they kind of connected me with various people. I had to do some of it myself, and I remember printing out my own little like cards about like who I was and all that to send out to, you know, endocrinologists in the area, et cetera. So you have to get creative a little bit. I think the online presence and having some kind of way to get your name out online, I think the Google search thing is very, very important. One thing that I have found helpful for meeting people, I'm not sure for getting referrals, I don't know, is giving talks out. So if your hospital has a CME department or some way for you to get your face out there to give talks, and the things that people want to hear about: thyroid nodules, workup of adrenal incidentoloma, and primary hyperpara. Those are things you're going to be very, very well versed in. And a lot of the community docs don't really know that much. It's still like this black box. And so I still go out and give talks on those types of things. Sometimes they'll want you to do something a little bit more broad. So I have a canned talk on neck masses. And, even though I don't deal with, cystic fibromas or whatever, I mean, I have a, talk on like how to, basically the differential of how to deal with a neck mass. And, I got a challenging question at the last one I did. It was something about HPV or something. I said, listen, I don't really deal with that. And, but, a head and neck surgeon or a ear, nose, and throat person may have a little bit more training in that area specifically. But, basically figuring out what your CME department wants to do. You meet people that way. And again, I'm not sure I get like a ton of referrals just because I'm out there like that, but that is a way for you to show your face, show that you're thoughtful, well-trained, educated, and a friendly presence for them to send patients to. Mike, have you done any of that kind of stuff, CME type things?
Well, I guess let me just back up a little bit. One thing I would say, I think one of your very best sources of future business is the patients that you're seeing every day in your office. So, when you're talking to people, assuming that you're a nice, friendly person and you don't treat them horribly, but, when people come back to you and, if they are happy with what you've done, you say, okay, here's health grades, here's, here, could you go leave a review on one of these sites? But if people are happy, you say, geez, could you tell everybody, including your primary care doctor? And it really makes a huge difference. People will start showing up from primary care doctors that you don't really know their name, you don't know where they're from, and you start looking and it's like, oh, well, it's because I had taken care of that other patient, and you start connecting the dots. So that's very helpful. The other thing I would say is if patients are having problems, give them your cell phone number. You think, oh, that's a horrible idea. I want my privacy. I can, in 19 years, I can count on one hand the number of people that have called me inappropriately. And you give them your number and you say, you know what, I want to be the very closest to this problem of anybody. I don't want you talking to your neighbor about it. And, if you have a problem, talk to me. If you don't have a problem, you like what I've done, tell everybody else.
Great advice. No, that's awesome. I'm going to turn the question back over to you, Lindsay, from Alex Chu. This is about when you reached out to other institutions for potential jobs. Who'd you reach out to? Was it chief of the division, the chair? And then did you have your program director kind of put out feelers first?
So I got different advice on this, and so I don't think there's one right or wrong answer. Chip Moore actually told me he's like general surgery. Just reach out to the division chief of general surgery. But then you kind of have to tailor it to the place and what they have, and where, if they have endocrine surgeons, what division are they in? And then also, if they don't, then maybe the chair, because the chair, if they don't have endocrine surgeons, the person who's going to be thinking about like, can we expand into endocrine surgery and deal with all the politics associated with that, is really like the chair. And it's helpful, I think, probably to have the division chief also be supportive, but usually it's really going to be the chair who has to make that call, because I think there is, and I've not been around that long, but I think there's a lot of sort of political capital that comes with hiring somebody who's going to be inherently probably cannibalizing some of the cases from other departments. So I would say that for places that have endocrine surgeons already, then I would email maybe that division chief. And you can also email the chair. I mean, there's no one right or wrong answer here. I think as long as you email and you are respectful, and when they, hopefully if they get back to you and they say, no, thank you, we're not looking right now, you can just say thanks and move on. Or you can, gently send them reminder emails. But I don't think there's a one universal right or wrong answer. So I think every institution has people kind of in different areas comparatively.
Yeah, and then I'll switch over to you, Mike. How about if people are looking for community jobs? Who's the best person? Is it some kind of hospital chair? I mean, I actually don't even know who the different people are in the power structure for health systems or that type of thing. What would be the best way? Or is there a recruiter, or how does that work?
Yeah, I would say in most medium-sized hospitals, even regional hospitals, there's going to be a chair of surgery. So I think that's a very reasonable person to look to. In a lot of communities, it's which practice, if they're private practices, which practice is the busy practice, who does, the reputable work in that community. So I think those are probably the two most appropriate places to go. So.
No, excellent. And then, yeah, Lindsay, did you have your program director or anyone kind of reach out on your behalf? This is something I wrestle with because obviously we want the person to shine on their own merits, but getting your foot in the door sometimes does require that phone call. I mean, what happened for you, Lindsay?
So for me, again, I was geographically limited to Philadelphia, and I knew obviously the people at Penn. So I spoke to them in person, and everyone else I sort of cold emailed. Um, and just because of, again, honestly, all the other hospitals in Philadelphia and the greater Philadelphia area did not have an endocrine surgeon. So it wasn't like, and I know my program director and the other senior people would have done anything I needed, but it wasn't like they knew the people there because there weren't any. Like Jefferson still does not have an endocrine surgeon. Cooper now will have Maureen Moore, who's starting, well, started now, but then had a baby. But there was not an abundance of endocrine surgeons to reach out and call, so it would not have like made a difference. What I did do, I know they made calls for me because they were trying to see about jobs sort of in the greater area. And so I know they were reaching out because I was like getting towards the end of my fellowship and I didn't have an offer yet from anywhere. So I know they made calls like in New Jersey and down in DC, but for a while it was really just me. And then again, my residency program director knew the Temple chair very well, and I think he at some point made some calls for me too. So again, don't limit yourself, but especially if you're going to a place where there aren't any endocrine surgeons, your program director may try as hard as they may not be able to do much for you there. But I think just, putting yourself out there politely and firmly and just offering up all the things that you can do and you can add is going to be really helpful.
Thank you, Lindsay. So we have a couple more questions here. I'm going to try to group them a little bit because we have some questions that we should cover in terms of like what to put in your cover letter, but also in the contract. So we'll save some time for that. But Mike, I'm going to direct this to you about, this is really about turf battles. It's how do you establish a practice in an area or a hospital where ENT does thyroids and paras, urologists or surgeons do the adrenals, and all the PCPs and endocrinologists are used to referring to them. It's really just about how you make inroads in a place where there are established practitioners.
Yeah, it's how do you upset the apple cart? You really need to break a chain of how things are being done. I think the best way really to do that is through good education and communication of the good education that you are receiving right now. And it's going to be ways to speak with endocrinologists, finding ways to get yourself in front of them. I think before you commit to going to a place, you really need to talk to the endocrinologists in that area, because they're going to control, depending on the community you're in, they're going to control the lion's share of the patients that you're going to end up seeing in many places. If you're in a smaller, for more rural place like mine, or even less so, then it's more PCPs. But if you don't have good supportive endocrinology, I think I would be cautious about whether you're going to jump into that spot. I also think it's you probably want to go to a place where the ENT, thyroid isn't the main part of what they're doing. If that's a side light in what their practice is, they're not going to be so upset if they're doing half as many of them. So.
And how about you, Lindsay? What did you do in this?
So I would say when I started, again, there was like a little bit of a gap in who was doing all the thyroids and paras, but because the previous guy had kind of left, and again, the ENT chair and I started the same day. And so she was kind of in the same place because again, she does predominantly head and neck. So she did some thyroid. There was another head and neck surgeon who was doing with the lack of anyone else doing it, all the thyroid and parathyroid, but it really wasn't his passion. And in fact, he hates parathyroid surgery. And he was like, you can have all of it. And I was like, sure. And then, so that really just took me, again, I met with endocrinology one of the times I interviewed. So they knew I was going to come. And then I went to like their first journal club. They had nothing to do with thyroid or parathyroid or adrenal, that they had though on like a random Monday to introduce myself to the endocrinologists. And, then I just made sure I was because again, I was not super busy for like I was not doing anything for like 6 months. So I just went to like every single endocrinology conference where there's anything related to the thyroid, parathyroid, or adrenals. anything. I offered to hold my own, like host the journal club and do it like a surgery or related surgery talk, stuff like that. And so I just kind of became a constant presence for the endocrinologists. And because nobody else had a practice that was dedicated to it, like the 2 head and neck surgeons wanted to do the big wax and free flaps and stuff, and they were happy to do thyroids too. It really just, I think, became obvious for most of the endocrinologists that I kind of enjoy this a little bit more. And so they sent me, I just kind of over time absorbed most of the stuff, plus all the paras, because neither of them really wanted to do them. And then for the adrenals, there was a couple urologists who would kind of do them here and there. One of them was very busy with like a big complex reconstructive practice, and he just did the adrenals that kind of got sent to him, but he didn't really care. And so I just emailed them both and I said, hi, I'm here doing adrenals. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm looking forward to working with you. And they were like, sure, we don't really care about them. And I was like, okay. So, I mean, it's not like they're sending them to me, but I know that they're not out there like pissed off that I'm doing them. I do think it has become, I've heard some rumblings that like now the ENT residents aren't getting enough thyroid numbers. I'm not really sure what the outcome of that is. I'm trying to just like take good care of patients and stay out of the fray. So that's sort of how I approach that. Just be available, be present, and be enthusiastic. And then it's, again, I have most of the volume here now.
Yeah, and then the last part of that is just what you said, to have good results, because that's the best marketing, right? Is you do a good job, that's going to speak for itself, and so that should kind of trump everything else. Lindsay, let's ask you, what's important to include in the cover letter? I think you covered it a little bit, but is there, and I can't remember if this is in the white paper or not, but do you want to just cover some of the key elements of what you want to put in there?
So again, I had like a sort of I wouldn't say a skeleton, but I had one, and then I would tweak it here and there to the place that I was applying. So like I had a different one when I sent my stuff over to Penn, where they had several endocrine surgeons, and a different one for when I sent it to a place that had none, for example. But I said loosely, it was like a really sort of a paragraph about like who I was and where I had trained. And then there was a paragraph saying that like I have like a broad surgical education in general surgery with a specific interest in like thyroid, parathyroid, and adrenal. I don't do pancreas. I did not want to do pancreas. So stating that, and then just saying I also have other interests in, like, for example, for me, I have my MBA, and so I was like other interests in surgical administration. But basically just saying that I have like this strong, I want to bring and develop for whatever institution an endocrine surgery program that addresses complex, benign, and malignant disease, you know, and then also teaches the residents. And you kind of have to make it sound really grand, but basically just describes what you are going to do, which is you're going to show up and you're going to do these cases. You're going to take care of everything related to thyroid, parathyroid, and adrenal. And you're going to teach the residents if you're applying to a place that has residents, and how are you going to teach them, and like talk about your commitment to surgical education and stuff like that. So it doesn't need to, it should be long because they don't have attention span for stuff that's super long, but it's like literally 2 paragraphs to just talk about really briefly who you are, what you can offer. And like, I really hope you'll consider my application.
Yeah, I would echo that. You got to keep it brief.
Yeah.
I would say a page. You should not be more than a page, because it really can be, you know, they probably are reading a lot of this kind of stuff, and it can be a little overwhelming to, like, you know, have someone go on and on. So that's a challenge, right? To get it all together in a couple paragraphs, but that's the key. I mean, that's what, I can't remember if it was you, Lindsay, or Mike, who said at the beginning, you have to figure out who you are during this time and what you want to do and what you want to accomplish. And, you know, no one's going to hold you to this grand plan either, too, right? I mean, I would say, you know, be ambitious. And, you know, they're not going to come back in 5 years and say, oh, what you said in your cover letter said X, Y, Z. That's probably pretty unlikely. And I'm not saying be dishonest. What I'm saying is, like, you know, we want to see that you've thought about it, right? That you have something beyond just what's going to happen next week. You have a vision for what you want to accomplish when you get there, someone who's going to be around for the long haul. And so, you know, definitely put it out there, but be concise. Let's get into the contract. And Mike, maybe I'll turn this to you. I guess it's kind of a broader question, but I think you can use your experience to guide this answer. What do you wish you had known about the contract itself?
Yeah, there's parts of contracts that are you know, things can be changed in the contract. There's parts of contracts that can't really be changed. You know, very clearly, if you're negotiating with a big hospital system, you know, many of those people have a very standard contract, and this is how it is. Within that, though, there's still a lot of leeway. The salary, maybe, you know, the type of salary, you know, how you're getting paid may not be variable, but it may be that there's some time for research, or you're teaching medical students and residents, and you know, maybe they're saying that's 0.1 you know, FTE of your job, or you know, maybe you can negotiate that up to 0.2 or something else like that. So those are helpful things to look at. What are the negotiable parts of it? You know, moving expenses, for example, other types of loan repayment, sign-on bonuses, things like that are things that are adjustable. If you're coming into a new department, you know, if they can name you a chair of that department or something like that, you know, there's other ways to get around the contract, you know, specific dollars. Oh, we can't pay more than X for an initial amount. But, well, can we do it this way? Or can you think about, you know, if you're somebody who has other interests? I do medical missions, and in my hospital, I said, you know what, I know it's, you know, 37 days is a standard contract, but I'm getting 50 days off because I'm spending 2 weeks a year in another country. And they wanted me to come, and they were fine to deal with that. And part of that was they knew my efficiency. They knew, you know, had a sense of where I was going to be with my reviews. You guys won't have that with your initial going out and contracting, but that's another thing is, you know, once you get it kind of a track record built up, that's helpful for that. You know, it's helpful to understand where the range of things is. And so we deal off of Sullivan-Cotter's numbers. There's also MGMA, and I think what's the academic Vizient. You know, there's benchmarks out there for what people can do, you know, what people within a field do. And now that's not really well established for endocrine surgery that is coming. We've been filling out surveys on it and so forth. And so we'll know more of that hopefully this year for you guys. But so anyhow, having an understanding of what the range is of things, I think that's important. If you are going into a position where you have a guaranteed salary to start with, I think it's important to know what productivity they expect from you at that guaranteed salary. And more so, what productivity you will need to maintain that guaranteed salary once you come off of a guarantee. Because it's great if they give you this, you know, fabulous package for the first year or 2 or 3, but then after that, you know, you're in a place where your family's ingrained into a community and you don't have the business to support what you want to do in those places. So I think that's an important thing. When I started here, there were non-compete clauses. So if you're stuck to a geographic area, that might be something that would be a very difficult thing for you. In many places, non-compete clauses aren't very valid anymore. In state of Maine, they don't hold up very well. So I don't know if other people have had concerns or issues about that.
And then do you advise that anyone get a lawyer, or who would you advise to help someone look through the fine print of a contract?
Yeah, I certainly had a lawyer look at my contract, the couple that I've had with other people. You know, it's not that expensive, and you know, they will make subtle little suggestions to you that may save you a lot of heartache in the end. And so spend, you know, the money on that. That's not a big deal.
Yeah, Lindsay, do you have advice on that front, on the contract and how to look through the details and what to ask for?
Yeah, I mean, I don't so much have a lot of advice because when I have my experience, which is that I had one offer from a place, and then I had another place that said, we're going to give you an offer. And I did not want to be at that second place. And again, I was just really geographically limited. So I negotiated a little bit. They basically gave me 2 years at a fixed amount, and I wanted to start in October, not September, which is when they wanted me. So I then negotiated starting in October, and to have my fixed contract be for 3 years. And those are the only things I really asked for at the beginning, because I did not think, I was just in a place where I just wanted a job, to be really, really frank about it. And I did not ask for a lot of the things that in retrospect, I wish I had asked for, but I also don't know at that time if that would have been successful. So I will say that I think the most important thing, if you can try to do it, is to get yourself on a general surgery scale in terms of your RVU expectation, whether it is, you make a certain amount or you exceed your bonus or whatever, because the surgical oncology average RVUs are something insane, like 9,000. And that takes a lot of time to be that busy, to be quite honest, especially if you're doing endocrine only. And there is some data on this that Jennifer Coyle published, but I think most endocrine surgeons are really around like the 4,000 to 5,000 mark for RVUs. And so if you're on a surgical oncology target, you will be stuck. And that's actually what I'm trying to work on with my next contract, is I'm still on the surgical oncology target. And like, there's no way, even if like I wanted to, they don't have the resources to let me do that. So that's something that I'm working on. And so it is a work in progress. But I think there's a lot of different contract permutations, and when I got my contract, I actually sat down with people at my program and I said, what do you guys think about this? And they're like, oh, the amount of money they're paying you is great. And I was like, great. They're like, it's money you would get paid here. I was like, okay. And then but they were like, this is not how our contracts are set up at all. And so it was just really different from institution to institution, how everyone pays people. Like some people are on the eat what you kill model, right? Where you just get paid for what you do. And some people are like, have a target, then you have to hit it, or you make less basically, or you like get bonuses if you go over your target. Everything is just really different. And you think until you have a contract in front of you, it's going to be really hard to figure out what to do about it. Because you're gonna be like, there's just so many permutations and it's hard to know. And so my advice is, when you do get a contract, it's weird talking to people about how much money you might be making, but like, I would say just actually reach out to people and ask what you should do, ask if this is reasonable, because you have no idea. And not just a contract lawyer, because what you don't know is like, what is a reasonable number of RVUs? What is a reasonable number of patients to see in a week? Like stuff like that, that's gonna be written to the contract, and you're like, I don't know.
And that data, those RVU data are, I sent out there's a link to the career development resources on the AAES website. And Jen Kuo did put in this whole thing about exactly, having those comparative numbers. Really, really useful information. A lot of stuff I had no idea of, and educational for me as well.
Right. And those weren't available when I looked for a job, or else I really would have been able to argue against the surgeon target, because I was like, everyone in my program was like, that's a lot. You're not going to hit that. And I just really had no idea like how much I was not going to hit that ever. And, I think, again, like most mature endocrine surgeons are like 4 to 5. And I think some 1,000 RVUs, and I think some really busy ones are more than that. But I think it's going to be a while to get there. So I just think, though, it's hard to know, and it's hard to negotiate now when you don't have offers, and maybe you'll be in a position that is very different. You'll have a ton of offers, and you can really choose with all these things and negotiate the perfect package. But my guess is that a lot of you will have other things like you really want to do, like a lot of research, or you really want to be in a certain location, and you're not going to not necessarily have the luxury of being able to negotiate a ton of things. And so I will also say that you should, again, get yourself a good contract, but also nothing is final. Like you're not going to be there forever necessarily, and you can always renegotiate your contract. But
yeah, and you've answered some of this next question from Alex Moore about, when you're interested in academics and doing research, are there particular payment structures that are more favorable for the lag time, meaning the lag time between kind of getting started with your academic stuff and then getting busier clinically?
So, I was started on a fixed contract, which if I didn't have a fixed contract, I wouldn't have like made money. basically, because like it took me, but first the insurances all have to get like you set up to approve, be operating under them, and then people have to send you patients. And then again, I was an endocrine only practice, so if you start out and you're going to do a bunch of general surgery or something else, it's probably a very different situation. But I did not want to open that door. So I was on a fixed contract where I made a certain amount no matter what. And if I exceeded like a 65th percentile of the national average or something, then I would make some sort of a bonus. And I don't think I ever got there. But
And then how many years was that initial contract for?
that was for 3 years. So that just ended. I'm just starting now my next contract, which is like, it just ended. And so it buys you a lot of time, and as you're building up, it also buys you time to get other things started. So like we talked earlier about, like, again, like research and things you can do, or the canned talks that you're going to write to go around and give for CMEs or to talk to PCPs, like that gives you time to build up all of those while you're waiting for people to actually send you patients. So it gives you some time to do that. And so I don't know if every place offers that though.
Yeah, I think it's fairly standard for that, for in most academic places, for that first contract to be a 3-year thing. And they call it being, here at UCSF, they call it being backstopped, where you're essentially, I think the medical center actually agrees to pay for a certain amount of the salary actually, and not the department, because it's basically an investment in you as an entity. And then you can define basically how you bring value by the end of that contract, and then renegotiate, just like you said, Lindsay. Mike, I'm going to turn this next question from Mohammed Sadani to you about the pros and cons of job recruiters. Do you have any insights or any experience with using those?
I unfortunately do not. I was looking at that out there and I was like, no, I've been in the same community for 19 years. So I don't, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I think in certain settings. So for example, if any of you are interested in the Kaiser system, really that's your point person for any kind of job inquiry. You're not going to go to some, at least from what I can gather, and in talking to people who are in that system, you're not really going to go through some chief of surgery. I mean, generally speaking, you have to go through a recruiter who's going to basically put all your stuff into the hopper there, and then match you up with the right spot. But if you have a specific place in mind, then they can also help to connect you and get things working. So I think in certain practices, that may be the point of contact. But in terms of like having them help you, I don't have any major experience. Lindsay, I don't know if do you know of anyone who's utilized those resources?
No.
All right. Good. I think we've gotten through most of the questions thus far. I wanted to open up and see in the remaining kind of 15 minutes or so if anyone else had other things they wanted to bring up. Mike, I wanted to bring it back to you, I guess. You said you've worn many hats. You've kind of gotten involved in a variety of different things. What percentage of your practice now is endocrine, and what happens here going forward? What kind of visions do you have? I know you want to continue with your missions, and you've been active, obviously, in the AAS, but what other kind of goals do you have going forward in this next stage?
Yeah, so from a surgical standpoint, I think my practice now is volume-wise is probably 2/3 or 3/4 endocrine. It could be all endocrine if I wanted, but I enjoy general surgery, so I still like doing that. If I could get rid of call, I'd be very happy with that, but it's part of general surgery. Other goals, I think as you progress through your career, kids start coming along and you start having other things drawing you away from doing what you're doing. So, one thing I've negotiated with the hospital, in addition to the 50 days off, I don't work Fridays anymore either. And so I guess I have 102 days off. Early on in my career, in addition to AES, I did a lot with American College of Surgeons. I was our state chapter president. I was the governor for our state. And that's kind of how I got into the American College of Surgeons community, the endocrine surgery discussion board. But, I think the further you get in things, you start wanting to carve out time for yourself too. And so I've been a little bit more protective of my time. Other things from a surgical standpoint, I think RFA has some legs, and I would like to get that going here. So that's been a big part of where my thrust is in our practice. I also think that I'd be interested in how many of the fellows are getting laryngoscopy training during your fellowship. I've always thought it was important to be able to handle all of the complications that I generate. I think that's one really nice thing about general surgery. And I've always felt it was inappropriate that I couldn't do laryngoscopy. And so that's something that I'm actively talking to my hospital about adding into things. So that's another surgical part of things. So those are kind of.
Oh, that's great. And, I think I want to hold you up as an example. Like, I mean, this is, you can do a lot of things as an endocrine surgeon, even in a non-academic setting. You can be involved in a lot of different areas. You can be an educator, you can be a leader, and you can really move the field. Even within the AAES, like I already mentioned, Mike, you've done a lot of great things for the community-based. I always want to call it that now. It's clinical practice committee or whatever it is. But for that branch of our organization, and taken a lot of leadership positions in that arena. And it's also important, like you said, to also continue reinventing yourself and looking for new challenges and new things to do. Because if you just do the same stuff all the time that you were doing at the start of your career, that's probably not going to be very interesting and probably lead to burnout, et cetera. So I would say as you move along, finding those new challenges and new things to add to your arsenal, I think it's really, really key.
Yeah, I do think it's important to be able to reinvent yourself because you don't want to get stuck into one area. So I do think that's important. I'm looking at this question. Do I want to do my own cord medializations? No, I don't want to get any cord injuries.
Right, as I was gonna say, he doesn't even know what that is because he doesn't have to deal with it, right?
But one thing that I picked up on my own was suturing a nerve. I suture my own nerves when they get injured because the best time to do it's the first time that, as soon as you find it.
Yeah.
So.
Lindsay, I was going to turn it over to you to talk about. So now you're, a few years into it, second contract, all that thing. What's your breakdown of how much time you're spending doing clinical work, academic work, or research work, I guess, and/or teaching, and how do you kind of break that down?
So I have 1 or 2 clinic days or OR days a week. It alternates between 1 and 2. And so on my OR days, so that's why I probably do on average about 3 cases a week. So again, 1 or 2. I take weekend general surgery call like about 8 times a year or so. And so that's clinical work, and technically that starts Friday morning. And so that's a little painful, but it is what it is. I have 2 clinic sessions, each are half days a week, and then 2 additional afternoons I go out to like an ancillary site where I'm trying to, again, as part of expanding, establish a certain foothold in a different like neighborhood. And that's not super busy, but I go out there and I see a patient or 2, and that's really it. So there's all of that. And, that's probably between that, and I don't really have a mid-level provider right now. That's something I'm working on for my next contract. I do all my own like phone calls to my patients afterwards, like making sure they have all the right medication when inevitably they don't get the right like calcitriol or their calcium or something. I have to go back and reorder that and organize it, and all that stuff takes time. So, it just fairly is time consuming, a lot of that little stuff. And then staying on top of all the ultrasounds and the FNAs and like what are the results coming back and all of that. So that takes a lot of time. I'm now associate program director, which is technically like 0.1 FTEs. So technically it's like a half day a week, and it is not a half day a week. It is more than that. But you'll realize that all these things that in theory buy down your time take up more time than they're really accounting for. Right now that's in theory, it's a half day a week. It's probably more like closer to like a whole day a week, just in terms of all the other stuff that comes along with it. And I spend about a day, in theory, Tuesdays is my administrative day to like do research stuff or again, answer patient phone calls, etc. And so that's kind of how my time breaks down. But you really realize that like the clinical stuff can really kind of expand as long as if you don't have a lot of other help, it can kind of expand to take up a lot of time, which is not a bad thing. Like it teaches you early on how to stay on top of all the stuff and how to manage people appropriately post-operatively, and how everything that's going on all the time. And again, that gets you a lot of like points with the endocrinologists and the PCPs and even the patients when you're calling them afterwards. So it takes a lot of time, but it's worthwhile. And, it's one of those things that you will always have stuff then getting added into your time that you're asked to do by your department or by your hospital. And for me, one of my personal goals, again, I have my MBA, I want to get more over time and have more of my time built into like administrative stuff. And so I've been asked to take on this like a side project for which obviously I'm not getting paid for. And it's a little bit of a headache, but it's like, that's how I'm going to, get my foothold in there. So your time goes in a lot of different places that you're not expecting it to.
And then why don't you talk a little bit about your involvement in the AAES? I know you do committee work and are definitely making inroads and adding to our organization there. What are you doing for the AAES?
So I am the co-chair of the Endocrine Surgery Identity Committee, which when I joined, it was just a task force and it was brand new. And actually writing this white paper was like the kind of a thing I started on my own. And then they were like, this fits really well into what we're trying to do, which is help strengthen our profile as an organization and offer more resources to our members. And so that's really how I got into that task force. And then it became a committee. And when you are on committees in general, if you actually show up to things and do what you say you're going to do, people really appreciate it because there's a lot of people who do neither. So it's so true.
Yeah.
So when you show up to things and when you volunteer to take on a task and when you complete it on time, people really appreciate that. And that will get you noticed and you'll get more involved if you want to be more involved. And so that's how I really felt into that committee. And then I was asked to be like a candidate member on the committee itself. And then again, because I was committed to it, they asked me and a colleague who's also a friend to co-chair it starting this year. And so that's a new thing for us. But that's been a really great opportunity to, again, flex my mind in a different way and to, work on some leadership skills, but also to think creatively and kind of, be able to kind of develop your own path and how you want to do something. So if you want to get involved, I know they're always looking for candidate members. There's application process each year that goes out in the spring. But I think it's a really good opportunity to get involved. And then again, as you're growing your practice or starting out, that's a really great place to also meet senior people. And then to stay involved if you want to be involved.
Yeah, and I would take even a step back. If some of you, I think all of you should be resident fellow members of the AES, but if not, definitely get your application in and start getting involved, because even though you're not a full member, you'll have access to definitely a lot of the resources that are available to AES members. But then also, once you are in the AES, and many of you already have participated, get involved in committees. There's a self-nomination process. There's also, it's pretty easy to just reach out to different people, whomever is a chair of a committee or is on one of these committees, just say, hey, listen, I'm interested in this particular area. I'd like to get involved. And for the most part, people will get you on board, because we love having, the new members and the new kind of energetic people to drive this forward. And Lindsay, you're a great example of taking something that you were personally invested and interested in, transforming it into this white paper, and then getting involved and becoming co-chair of a committee. That's just all in the space of a few years. So those opportunities are there, and the organization is growing. Mike, you said before that we all fit in a room. We barely fit in a room now. It's definitely a bigger organization. I was membership committee chair for the past 3 years, and during that time, I think we added somewhere upwards of 60 new people. And really, all of you should have it on your timeline. In 2 years, I believe, is when you become eligible. After you finish your graduation, just be ready to apply at the same time for the American College of Surgeons and for the AAES, because you need to have your ACS application either in or approved before you can apply for AAES membership. I myself made that mistake, and I actually missed the deadline 1 year. So I was a year late in joining, and I caught up, I guess, eventually, but I was a year late from everyone else who was eligible that year. So put that on your calendars. It's easy to forget when you get busy, and you can get all the benefits of this organization. Mike, did you want to say something?
No, you're doing great.
Sorry, you unmuted, so I was like, here we go.
I was muting because I have dogs that seem to find the squirrels very interesting outside.
or they want to contribute to the conversation about
Yeah.
endocrine surgery identity. I want to wrap this up a little early because I know, especially East Coast, you all have a long day and we're taking a lot of your time. I really want to thank Lindsay and Mike for offering their experience, their insights, their wisdom, and they are great resources. I'm going to sell you guys out. I mean, you are definitely people I would reach out to and ask for advice at any time, and I would urge the fellows to do the same.
Please feel free and share our emails. That's not a problem at all.
Sure, absolutely. We'll get that out to you. Plus, I already sent the link, but I'll get the actual white paper PDF out to you all tomorrow. Hit me up if you got questions or suggestions. As I mentioned, the next planned webinar will likely be November, December, and it'll be about building a research platform, building a research program or an academic profile. Just stay tuned for those announcements. Again, thanks for spending the time tonight. Everyone stay well. I guess we'll probably see each other virtually at the college coming up, and then other opportunities to get together via these webinars. And then, of course, the actual ESU and AES meeting next May. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Good night.
Good night.